Hi, this is Sue Phillips from the Science Fiction Literature track at Dragon Con Goes Virtual. This evening we have a reading from Jean Marie Ward, and I will go away now and let her introduce herself and her work.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, my name is Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between. Today, however, I will be reading from some of my science fiction. And first up is The Wrong Refrigerator, a story that appeared in Asimov's in October of 2018. Okay. And one of the things about my science fiction you should probably know is that it's not all about spaceships, especially not this story. This story is about much more intimate things. The Wrong Refrigerator. Rose-tipped azure light haloed the back of the Tuckers' new refrigerator. Allie wished she could blame the effect on a wayward sunbeam. Unfortunately, it was raining, and even if it hadn't been, the kitchen windows faced the wrong direction to catch the evening light. Besides, the problem couldn't be the light. The room's other brushed steel appliances sported the same cold gray sheen as always. She shook her head. Something seriously wrong with this refrigerator. Yeah, her husband Kyle said. He hitched a glass under the ice dispenser. The damn ice maker's broken. The fridge is leaking freaky colored light, and he's worried about ice? What's wrong with this picture? A grinding gurgle echoed from the freezer compartment. If this was his new Beamer and it made that kind of noise, he'd be howling for a mechanic, not randomly jabbing the controls. Piece of shit, Kyle roared. His fist slammed the control screen. Allie cringed. His rage came out of nowhere. Not that she was in any danger, not really. He'd never raised a hand to her. He didn't need to. When the guy with the anger management issues was 6'2" and solid as a tank, the possibility of violence was enough to keep smaller people in line. Machines too, apparently. A flare of green lit the screen. A whir thrummed from the back of the refrigerator. Kyle flashed a cocky smile. Works every time. He replaced his glass under the dispenser. The green light winked out. Fuck it, he snarled. You tell those assholes at Big Buy they'd better fix this thing by Saturday, or they're going to wish they never heard of Kyle H. Tucker, Esquire. More and more lately, she wished she hadn't. He stomped down the stairs to the basement and its fully operational fridge. Allie slumped against the dining room pass-through and tried to relax. Hot and cold running rage was just another management strategy he was trying on for size. Dogged as he was when it came to sucking up to the senior partners at Blaylock Mills and Chang, he lacked the patience for sustained emotional abuse. At least that's what she told herself, ignoring the seed of disquiet that had taken root in her brain. If she truly believed otherwise, she'd need to find herself a divorce lawyer who was a bigger shark than Mills or Chang. Not likely. Across the top of the control screen, a line of colored lights blinked sequentially from left to right, then in groups of 2, 3, and 5. Was the machine having second thoughts? Smart machine. She grabbed a glass off the drain board and held it under the dispenser. Nothing. She tried resetting it per the instructions, but the refrigerator didn't like her fingers any better than Kyle's. Now she understood why the delivery guy scrawled his phone number on the receipt. He wasn't making a pass. He was trying to prevent a complaint. With all the special features attached to this model, it probably happened all the time. Too bad he used a Sharpie. The paper had landed in the only wet spot on the dark granite counter. All that was left of the numbers was a smear. The kitchen clock read 7:45, 15 minutes before Big Buy's helpline closed for the night. She rubbed her temples. After working from home all day while she waited for the delivery guy, she was wiped, and she still had to buy groceries. They couldn't afford Kyle's idea of stocking the larder. Literally, Kyle shopped like he'd already made partner. But it would be worth falling asleep over a shopping cart if she could arrange a service call tonight. Narisha, the Big Buy rep assigned to Allie's call, sighed. I'm sorry, your address isn't in my system. It has to be, Allie said. Big Buy charged my account. Charges are handled by accounting. They close at 5. Allie pinched the bridge of her nose. I don't need accounting. I need someone to fix the refrigerator you delivered today. Ma'am, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Big Buy didn't deliver anything to your address. There aren't any deliveries scheduled for Radnor, Pennsylvania all this week. And I'm telling you, the refrigerator is here, in my kitchen. I'm looking straight at it. Not the smartest move, with the twin jackhammers of hunger and stress pounding the inside of her skull. The refrigerator's aura had dissipated, but glints of two-toned color remained embedded in the minute striations of the brushed steel finish. Sky blue pink. The words popped out of nowhere, the imaginary color her high school boyfriend used to describe the inconceivable. Jason Firth. She hadn't thought about Jason in years. Ma'am, that's not possible, Narisha insisted. The Centauri 42 is on back order. I could send you a picture, Allie cooed. If Kyle was polishing his anger as management tool, she was becoming an expert in passive aggression. Not just the fridge. I have the paperwork right here. She rattled the receipt for emphasis. It says Big Buy at the top with the number directly underneath. The installer was Jay Firth? Her voice lifted in question. It can't be. No, it couldn't. Sure, the guy looked vaguely familiar and was more or less the right age. That didn't count. She'd spent high school and college surrounded by lanky guys with bottle-bottom glasses and bad haircuts. Based on the ones she'd run into since, some of them never changed, which was why Jay Firth couldn't possibly be Jace. He wouldn't be caught dead working a blue-collar job this close to their old high school. He might be recognized by somebody with a lower grade point. That's for sure. We won't be getting any more Centauri 42s for at least 2 weeks. Okay, but I still have a broken refrigerator, and my husband's boss and his wife are coming to dinner this weekend. Sounds like a job for our service squad. Okay, connect me, please. I can schedule them from here. Great, Allie said. When's your next opening? 2 weeks from tomorrow. You're kidding me. No, ma'am, we're not allowed to jest with the customers. Well, somebody was, and if Allie ever figured out who, she planned to make them really sorry. Until then, she couldn't snark at Narisha. The woman hadn't done anything wrong, and Allie needed that service appointment. She took a deep breath and found the calm, eminently reasonable tone she used on underperforming staff at the bank where she worked. That's not acceptable, Narisha. That's not what Big Buy advertises, and that's not what it says on my service contract. She crossed her fingers. She hadn't gotten around to reading all the 2-point print. I know about these things. My husband's an attorney. Well, Narisha wavered, you could always buy another refrigerator. Do a swap, you mean? Kyle would hate it. He had his little lawyer's heart set on a new Centauri. Appliances had snob rankings. Who knew? Still, it was better than nothing. The Centauri 36 has the same footprint as the 42, Narisha said. The shelves are different, and it doesn't have as many apps. But from the outside, you can hardly tell the difference. And the 36 is in stock. I can have one delivered in 14 days. Allie hung up. It was either that or throw the phone at the wall. If it broke, Kyle would insist on replacing it with something that cost almost as much as the fridge. Plus, it would delay the search for a repair person. Regardless of whether the refrigerator was on back order, after years of dealing with off-site fulfillment centers, she had her doubts. She balked at ordering a replacement without a refund in hand. They were already pushing their credit limit. She would need to dip into her PayPal savings, the account not in both their names, to pay for repairs. Could she hold out for Big Buy? Forget the ice maker and the light show. If the fridge worked, she could always buy ice. The ebonized wood handle felt warm and silky to the touch, a nice contrast to the toothy cold of the freezer bay. The 42 lacked a backup ice maker, but her old-fashioned plastic trays were already frozen. Score! She opened the door to the refrigerator compartment. In addition to cold air and new plastic smell, the chamber sported a quart of half and half on the center shelf. Where did that come from? She shrugged. Kyle had probably brought it up from the basement. She was glad he had. She could use a cup of coffee right now. even if it disrupted her sleep patterns. She tossed a pod in the coffee maker. Her good mood lasted until she unscrewed the cap on the carton. The smell of faded cheese fermenting in paint thinner made her eyes water. Hurriedly, she replaced the cap and checked the carton's expiration date. What the hell? The red design on the front of the carton was blurred, as if the plastic coating had come too close to something hot. But the use-by date stamped on the top was still legible. Ironically, it was the same day she and Kyle closed on the house. Despite the inflated cost and her objections, he'd insisted on buying into a gated community close to his firm's mainline office, tripling her commute. She seriously considered separating. She tossed the cream with that date and the sour memory in the trash. And if you want to find out what happens, you can check it out at Asimov's, because this story made their list of the top 5 novelettes for 2018, and they stay on the site. And if you read Chinese, you may soon be able to read it in Mandarin in Science Fiction World, the world's largest science fiction magazine. I can't wait for that either. Now, next up, we're going to go in a completely different direction. We're going to do some steampunk. Now, steampunk sci-fi, right? Well, this particular steampunk had its origins in the movie Cowboys versus Aliens. The publishers of Zombies Need Brains had a real thing for Daniel Craig. So when they invited me to participate in the anthology, The Clockwork Universe, Steampunk versus Aliens, I resolved to give the publishers and the editors what they wanted. It was steampunk. It had basic physics and elemental chemistry. It had 2 chihuahuas. And it had Daniel Craig with a chicken stuffed in his head. The story is called still on the wrong refrigerator. The story is called The Wizard of Woodrow Park. It started with a bang. Really, a shiny red open chassis air car struck the curb at the corner of First and Main, and its right front tire exploded. Further down the block, in front of the Main Street display windows of Tiles Dry Goods, a tall, rangy man wearing a leather vest and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves whirled at the sound. He dropped smoothly into a shooter's crouch, but instead of pulling a gun, he clenched his right fist and sighted down the length of his arm. The gesture activated the controls of the camouflaged Vambrace-style weapons unit attached to Avian Special Agent Greek Meekram's forearm. Shielded from the early morning glare by the broad brim of his brown felt hat, he scanned the firing display superimposed on his vision. The crosshairs locked on the spot where the driver's canvas cap met the leather strap of his goggles. The target automatically recalibrated as the roofless air car juddered over the sidewalk. Greek yanked his arm back. What was he thinking? His mission was a search and rescue, not an assassination. The goal was not killing anybody, especially not a native. Blasted human suit. Wearing one always made him edgy. At least he wasn't the only one who reached for his gun, but he was the only one with an invisible weapon, so he was the one getting the fisheye from the other pedestrians. He straightened, stretched his lips in the harmless smiley practice, and pretended not to notice the way a passing matron flicked her skirts out of his personal space. The brass air tanks mounted behind the driver's seat clanked as the right side of the car dropped from the sidewalk to the street. The vehicle wobbled, unbalanced by its ruptured wheel. The driver shimmied the steering rod to compensate. When that didn't work, he grabbed the horn. "Da-dum!" it blared. "Da-dum!" Across the street, a horse harnessed to a delivery van trumpeted in counterpoint. It reared in its traces. Spooked, the air car driver bucked in his perch. He pulled the steering rod hard to the right. The car veered. The lantern hook on its prow shot toward Greek. He leapt clear. The same instant, someone screamed, "Look out!" The driver heaved left. The car shook, squealed, swerved. The smell of burnt rubber momentarily overwhelmed the reek of aging produce, horse sweat, and dung trapped between the brick and frame buildings of the street. Then the car lurched into its designated traffic lane and rattled up Main with all the grace of a 3-legged Farentac after a 4-day bender. Creek exhaled a long breath. His pulse slowed to what humans considered normal, but aftershocks of adrenaline still sparked along his nerves. Maybe he should have shot the moron, or at least disabled the car. A short teenage girl hopped off Tile's front steps. Hands on her hips, she shouted after the car, "There ought to be a law! No driving until you know how!" Creek flinched. The girl could have given screaming lessons to eagles. All the way across 2nd Street, the aircar driver hunched defensively. But her voice didn't startle Creek as much as her outfit. Her ruffled gingham blouse was tucked into a pair of khaki twill trousers identical to his own. A ball-shaped leather helmet dangled from one arm. That was wrong. According to CLEAX's preliminary lexicon of New Dominion Territories language and mores, gender roles in the town of Woodrow Park typified the rigid distinctions of an early industrial society. Admittedly, CLEAX's intel was 17 years out of date, but it shouldn't have mattered. CLEAX had completed enough missions among primitive cultures to know their mores simply did not change that fast. The women of CLEAX's New Dominion territories shouldn't be wearing trousers for another 2 generations, much less engaging in activities that required a helmet. The people on the street should have been pelting the girl with rotten fruit, not encouraging her with shouts of, "That's right, you tell him, Jenny." Good thing he'd disabled his automatic surface-to-ship uplink as soon as he landed his Stratoflyer. Since arriving in town, he'd seen enough cultural and technological anomalies, air cars in a coal-based society, electric streetlights, industrial-sized pelide coils, to have every desk jockey in the area calling for military intervention. CLEAX wasn't about to let that happen, not until he figured out what was going on and how it was connected to the disappearance of Weaverell CLEAX. "You know, that's not a bad idea," Jenny continued in a more conversational volume. "They make us go to school for reading and math. Why not driving?" A muffled grunt drew CLEAX's attention to the sidewalk on the other side of the entrance. A pair of scuffed work boots attached to denim-trousered legs protruded from a collapsed sandwich board advertising Tile summer prices. "Shiro!" Jenny gasped. "Are you hurt?" The voice was male and surprisingly deep. The girl lunged for the sign. Air hissed through her teeth as she strained to lift the metal-framed placards. Avian agents were held to the same strict Allied Planets Consortium non-intervention standards as embedded anthropologists and other scientific observers. But no matter what body you stuffed him in, CLEAX wasn't a churl. "I got this," he said. The deep voice belonged to a boy no older than Jenny. Unlike her, Shiro was tall for his age and from the size of his hands and feet, still growing. He wore a white-collared gray shirt and red suspenders consistent with the images in CLEAX. But in the context of Woodrow Park, his straight black hair, the ochre tint of his complexion, and the shape of his dark brown eyes looked far more alien than the straw-colored hair and craggy features currently attached to CLEAX. Yet another anomaly. CLEAX hadn't mentioned anyone of Shiro's ancestry in the territories. The boy had obviously been around long enough for the town to accept him, and Jenny, as a couple. The girl fluttered around him in a classic display of courtship behavior, and passers-by only smiled. "Is anything broken?" she warbled. "Should I get a doctor?" "Jenny, I'm fine. Just give me a minute." Despite the differences in their voices, the teenagers shared the same accent. Linguistic analysis confirmed they were born locally. Since it took a generation to integrate immigrant populations into comparable industrial societies, Shiro's family must have lived in Woodrow Park at least 30 years. Why hadn't CLEAX mentioned them in his reports? Answering that question was worth drawing out the conversation. CLEAX did a quick scan of the boy's vitals. "Nothing's broken," he said. His internal translator supplied the appropriate idiom from the lexicon. He hoped it still applied. "He just had the wind knocked out of him." "Then why isn't he getting up?" Jenny demanded. "Because you're standing too close. I might knock you over by accident," Shiro said. Her eyebrows lifted. "You'd rather do it on purpose?" CLEAX bit back a smile. The kid was embarrassed enough already, but he couldn't stop his 2 mobile human lips from twitching as he helped Shiro to his feet. Shiro flushed to his ear tips. "Give me a break. I'm still growing into my feet," he growled. His color deepened. "Sorry. That came out rude. Thanks for your help, mister. The sign weighed more than I thought." He extended his right hand, presumably to be shaken. CLEAX claimed the locals shook hands for everything from greetings to thanks. Kriak clasped the boy's calloused palm. It was a mistake. Kriak's weapons unit was virtually indestructible, and like all AP cybernetic interfaces, designed for field use, key to his host. It couldn't be disabled without priming the release with a sample of his DNA. Its camouflage field, on the other hand, was a mist of carefully balanced illusion. It was never meant to withstand the enthusiastic pumping of an overcompensating adolescent who didn't know his own strength. The unit's projected image of tanned forearm buzzed and vanished. Kriak hoped Jenny didn't scream when she saw the vambrace. The nearest local equivalent was a convict's shackle. "Wow," Shiro said. Without letting go of Freak's hand, he angled his arm for a better view. "I've never seen a prosthetic like this. Feels heavy. What's it made of? Is there a reason for the..." He stopped mid-word, staring at the cover to the unit's stunner port. Sweat beaded his hairline. His fear hormone spiked, sharp enough to smell, no additional sensors required. Nobody reacted like that to a stunner cap unless they'd seen a stunner in action. The only other person on the planet with that kind of technology was the embedded anthropologist Kriak had been sent to find. Had Kliax been forced to use his defense unit, or had he done so voluntarily? Crap. Kriak might be forced to call in the military now. A flashback to the last planetary rectification he'd witnessed dried the spit in his throat. Jenny pressed the back of her hand to her forehead and groaned dramatically. "Oh no, not a new prosthetic. I'll never get my steam cycle lesson now. We'll be here all day." Shiro jerked his hand away from the device. He hissed, "Jenny." Kriak rubbed his arm. The unit had become such a part of him, he seldom thought about its weight. He asked mildly, "You interested in prosthetics?" "Interested," Jenny chortled. "You'll be lucky if he doesn't try to take it apart while it's still on your arm. Shiro's nuts for anything mechanical. Has been since he was a kid. Now he's the youngest engineer in the history of Kliax Industries. He's worked on some of their biggest projects ever." "Kliax?" Freak stuttered. "Weaveril Kliax? It can't be." "Only Kliax in Woodrow Park. Well, unless you count the missus, but Maybelle still uses her maiden name for business reasons. Then there are the kids, but they all kept their father's name, even though Mr. Kliax adopted them years ago." "Jenny, stop!" Shiro grabbed her arm and towed her toward the store. "We've got to get inside, now!" Jenny started to protest. His expression changed her mind. Hurriedly unlocking the door, she muttered, "What's going on? Close up." The door clicked shut behind them. Not that they were in any danger from Kriak. He was too busy imitating the impact site of an extinction-class meteor. Weaveril Kliax, Avenar's favorite missing anthropologist, was alive and well 17 years after his last transmission from Woodrow Park. He'd started a manufacturing company, hired engineers, and showed at least one of them his defense unit. Then he started a nest, with humans no less. But that wasn't enough for Weaveril Kliax. Oh no, the misbegotten son of a live birth lizard did it all under his legal name, a name unique to their homeworld, Avenar. Every brain cell and enhancement in Kriak's skull sputtered with the potential consequences for this world, for Avenar, for the entire Allied Planets Consortium. The bastard must have lost his feathered mind, or else he was laying the groundwork for an insanity defense. And if you want to find out what happens, obviously, you need to find The Clockwork Universe, Steampunk versus Aliens. Now, since I've been reading excerpts and will, in closing this reading, read another excerpt, which means you have to go out and find the stories if you want to know how it ends. My next reading is one of the shortest stories I've ever written. It's from an anthology called Yesterday I Will. Now, the thing about Yesterday I Will is every story in this anthology had to have the words, "Yesterday I will." Yesterday, I will read the note I sent myself. The only time I will approach the time machine will be to check the readings. I will not blow my cool and pretend I need to test Novikov's principle of historical self-consistency by tossing a squeaky rubber cow into the time stream. I might still wind up the last guy on the planet, but at least I'll have a girlfriend. That's it. Total story. And finally, my most recent science fiction. A few years ago, Chuck Gannon invited several of his friends and me to write stories in the world or the universe of Kane Riordan, his military science fiction series. Those stories became the anthology Lost Signals of the Terran Republic, which was published in 2019. My story ends the collection, and in case you don't know, it's really a good thing to be either the first story or the last story in a collection or anthology of stories. It means you've done something right. Once again, I didn't quite write the kind of science fiction that people expect. You know, everybody else was writing space battles or Earth battles or spaceships. However, I worked in the Department of Defense for a really long time. And one thing that remains the same, whether you're looking at Rome, ancient Rome that is, the Middle Ages with its knights in armor, the modern day Department of Defense, there is an enormous infrastructure that is required to make things work. And if you have the keys to that infrastructure, well, you can do damn near anything. And that's what my story is about. It's called the Ellsberg Variations. The presenter at the February 21 Pentagon Awards ceremony dropped his gaze from the floating teleprompter and stared solemnly at his audience. I braced myself. It's never good when a senior defense official goes off script. But before you congratulate our honorees and celebrate their achievements, I want you to take a moment to remember the people who couldn't be there. The people who are the reason we are here, he said. The lost heroes of the battle for Earth, forever frozen in time and space. I winced. Corpsicles in space! Right before they cut the cake, too. A USSF Marine standing near the entrance of the Hall of Heroes flinched. Marines don't flinch at nukes, much less sticks, stones, or high-speed projectiles. The only way the official's words could have hurt her would be if one of those lost was someone she loved. Hands pressed against her stomach, she fled the room. I followed. I wanted to help. Trouble shared might not be trouble halved, but my own misery craved company. She'd vanished by the time I reached the entrance. On a hunch, I checked the nearest restroom. The air inside smelled of bleach, and the doors to all but one of the stalls hung askew. Deep, shuddering breaths echoed from the single closed compartment. Sometimes I hate being right. I slipped a packet of tissues under the closed door. Would you like some water? The woman gulped. I don't know. Her voice rose to a howl. I don't know. I heard a soft smack, like she clapped a hand over her mouth, then silence. A moment later, she murmured, Water would be good. Give me a minute. I waited by the sinks while she pulled herself together. Eventually, she marched out of the stall. Shoulders squared, a major's gold oak leaves gleaming on the epaulets of her uniform. Her face was pink from crying, but otherwise composed. She possessed the austere beauty you see in a lot of women Marines, fine-boned, lithe and deadly as a Japanese katana, but even tempered steel can break. Her hazel eyes widened. You're the reporter from Military News, Della Monroe. Guilty as charged. I was impressed. The news is strictly niche media, and my official photo was 12 years out of date. I assumed she was a military aide who fed names and other useful information to some VIP's earbud, possibly even today's ranking idiot. I'm also a military widow with spare tissues and potable water. Truce? Strictly off the record, of course. She chuckled ruefully and thrust her hands into the basin of the all-in-one sink. That's good, because I'm a disgrace. I don't know why I broke down. The war was over a year ago. Yeah, it's a complete mystery, I drawled sardonically. Earth gets invaded by aliens we didn't know existed 3 years ago. Millions die. 6,000 years of religious beliefs and cultural expectations go up in smoke. And the only way to get rid of the giant cockroaches and gun-toting anteaters is to turn the whole planet into Vietnam. I can't imagine why you're upset. A pair of creases formed between her well-groomed brows. Vietnam? The theater of operations was Indonesia in the South Pacific. Sorry, recovering historian here. I was talking about the 20th century conflict between the US and Vietnam. But we lost that one because the Vietnamese made it too expensive to win. They sacrificed strategic resources to lure us into a series of indefensible positions at the end of overextended supply lines, forcing us to fight a guerrilla war on their turf where we couldn't tell friend from foe. Sound familiar, I asked? The in-sync dryer finished its cycle. She waved her hands under the sensor to restart the cleansing process. You're forgetting how the Viet Cong manipulated public opinion against us. I smothered a grin. I never heard of anybody using the Vietnam War as grief therapy, but it seemed to be exactly what the major needed. The Viet Cong didn't turn America against the war. We did it all by ourselves, I said. When Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, the American people found out 4 presidents had lied to them about what was happening in Indochina and why. They got a little upset. The major tossed an impish smile over his shoulder as the sink finished its second cycle. And the media got rich. Yeah, I deadpanned. Good times. I offered her the water bottle. She reached for it with her left hand. Her third finger sported a Naval Academy ring with a second, narrow gold band nestled against the shank. From the Vietnam War era into the beginning of the 21st century, philandering academy grads used their cadet rings to hide their wedding bands. But the custom changed over time. Now a double ring ceremony between graduates was as much a part of a military wedding as the saber arch. Is your spouse a Marine too? She blanched and clutched the bottle against her chest. What makes you ask? Her light tone sounded forced. Your ring. My husband graduated from Annapolis. That's right. You said you were a military. She turned as gray as her blouse. I'm sorry, I'm a mess. I think, she tapped her collar comb. I'm late for a meeting. Thank you for the water. She double-timed from the room. I wasn't insulted. Marines might not flinch in the face of live fire, but most military personnel share an uneasy relationship with the press. She could have been afraid I'd take advantage of her vulnerable state to extract the details of her boss's sex life, as if I could. I didn't know who she was, much less her boss. I never saw her name tag. The bottle was always in the way. Had that been deliberate? I shrugged. It didn't matter. I needed to get back to the Hall of Heroes before all those newly honored human interest stories scuttled back to their offices in the secured areas of the building. My productivity had recovered from my husband's death, but the News's owner never met a reporter he couldn't fire. Luckily, he couldn't fire my thoughts because I couldn't get that restroom conversation out of my head. In the dark of earliest morning, long after I went to bed, I kept hearing the major say, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't wonder who she was worried about. It could only be her spouse. She choked on the word widow. But how could she not know whether her spouse was alive or dead? Every U.S. service member has an ID chip implanted near their collarbone. The chip signals piggybacked on military shift ships and regular slower-than-light transports, providing real-time proof of life, death, and location. Thanks to the chips, we knew the fate of every service member who fought in the recent war, even if we couldn't recover their remains. The technology spared us from one of the great tragedies of the Vietnam War. Our military families wouldn't spend a lifetime wondering about the fate of their loved ones. The death blow was immediate, sharp, and brutal, but ultimately cleaner. That's what I told myself anyway. By 4, I admitted I was hooked. I had to know the story behind the major's odd behavior. After nearly 2.5 years of hibernating on the job, my curiosity gnawed my insides, and with it, a small, stupid, starving hope. What if the chips are wrong? The first time since Space Force casualty officers notified me of my husband's death on that ship. I logged into the family side of the News's online communities, searching for whispers of missing personnel. Forget whispers. People were yelling. My first thought was, how did I miss this? After a figurative smack to the head, my second was, why wasn't military news covering the story? We had an entire news subscriber community dedicated to the issue. If that weren't enough, A series of DoD spokespersons had visited the community and posted videos touting the wonders of our chip-based personnel identification system. But as soon as the community challenged them on individual cases, the spokespersons vanished from the conversation, only to be replaced by others who repeated the process from scratch. The spokesperson's behavior made no sense. This wasn't a disinformation campaign of rumors and innuendo. Family members were naming names and demanding an accounting. Even more damning, I knew one of them. Gooseflesh prickled my neck. My half-buried past had risen from its tomb and come a-haunting. Enola Irons, mother of missing USSF Marine Jonah Irons, graduated from the same academy class as my husband, Calvin. They dated as undergrads and parted amicably a short time later, mainly because Space Force kept assigning them to different planets. Cal specialized in forensic accounting. Nola earned a double master's in financial management and hospital administration. Only the Department of Defense could fail to make that work. But Cal admitted he wasn't entirely sorry their assignment requests went awry. Nola could be, in his words, a little intense, which in Cal speak translated to downright scary. Remember, the man ended up with me, AKA Pitbull Monroe. I met Nola in Pensacola during Cal's second tour at Cislunar Fleet Support. After 10 years of lackluster assignments under senior officers who ran the gamut from envious to intimidated, Nola was already planning her transition to the corporate world. Within a few years, she rose to the top of the executive heap as the chief financial officer of Mediana Care, the military's biggest health services provider. Still, I almost abandoned the project. Reading her posts and the DoD's non-response responses, I sensed the story was bigger than anything I'd tackled since Cal died, maybe bigger than I could handle. But Nola had been a big part of Cal's life. The part of me still reaching for him saw it as a sign I couldn't ignore. That afternoon, I braved a cold, blustery rain to sneak home for lunch and some privacy. Nola accepted the call and video. Her office was a decorator's dream, but her winter white suit struck me breathless. I hadn't given a damn about clothes since Cal died, except to ensure mine were reasonably clean and appropriate to the occasion. Crazy as it sounds, the smallest vanity felt like a betrayal. How could I care about my looks when Cal wasn't around to see? But I wanted that suit like I craved sunshine after 8 days of rain. The sudden yen made no sense. I couldn't wear Nola's clothes. She was 15 centimeters taller than me and lean where I was curvy. The Nola in my palm top screen wasn't lean. She was gaunt. Her complexion, which I remembered glowing like polished ebony, had dulled to the texture of soot. In contrast, her red-rimmed eyes burned hotter than the flame she touched to her cigarette. The habit was new and subject to a company fine, but she plainly didn't care. She took a fortifying drag and leaned forward. 3 ships, Jonas Clipper, a patrol boat, and a transport, on a standard Mars transit a couple weeks before the 2119 alien convocation, she rasped, her voice rough from more than smoke. The ships arrived at their departure in perfect condition. They immediately returned to service, but everybody on board vanished, and Space Force won't say why. My mind flashed back to my first command picnic at Cislunar Support. Cal spent hours lobbying easy pitches and encouragement to a toddler-sized whirlwind named Jonah, swinging an oversized bat. The vision of Cal's handsome, sunlit face, the memory of his booming laugh grabbed my heart and squeezed. Nola, I'm so sorry. They're not dead. They're still getting paid. I rocked in my chair. Since the war, everybody knows the roles military ID chips play in proof of life. But few civilians realize the ID chips form the basis of the entire military pay system. Everything about the chips, from the manufacturing standards of their triple shielded components, to their integration into the military's Priority 1 encrypted communication systems, to their injection site, was designed to provide the U.S. military the accurate data they needed to manage the pay of millions of active duty, reserve, and retired personnel scattered across explored space. The recorded error rate for the system's life-death location data was as close to 0 as a man-made system gets. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing's perfect. That damn Hope shrilled. Cal could be out there somewhere, alive, praying for someone to find him. I opened my mouth to shut Nola and my hope down. All of them, she said. 41 people on 3 different ships. What are the odds? I couldn't count that high. You got proof? Her shoulders relaxed. She stubbed her cigarette into a butt-filled marble ashtray. Officially, 26 leave and earning statements. That's the number of people represented by the spouses and designated reps in the support group I put together. I have the LESs for 7 on Jonah's Clipper, 8 on the patrol boat, and 11 on the transport. Unofficially, I called in some favors. All 41 are being paid. For what? I asked, repressing a shudder of excitement and unease. I'm not saying it isn't strange, but look at the timing. You said it happened right before the convocation. Those crews could have been diverted to a classified operation or injured on a diplomatically sensitive mission. Have you run a comparative analysis of base pay and allowances? What good would that do? It would show whether anybody's receiving hazard pay for non-combat risks or been sidelined on medical leave. If they aren't, they're probably dead. It's some kind of glitch. Like hell, 3 whole crews don't vanish because of a glitch. Enola irons, I barked, surprised by how good it felt to shout. Do you want my help or not? Her eyes were if eyes were lasers, hers would have torched me all the way from Nebraska. I crossed my arms. Remind me again, how long have you been trying to get traction on this? Nola was stubborn, not stupid. She took a deep breath. Long enough to make me real unpopular at Mediana. You want to back off? Not until I know what happened to Jonah. But be careful. Challenging anything military right now could cost you. I wasn't worried. Questioning the military was my job. But when Nola's ghostly image lingered on my screen for several seconds after we signed off, a superstitious shiver rippled down my spine. I told myself the Phantom was an artifact of our still recovering communications grid. My OpenNet connection hadn't glitched in months. But what else could it be? And to find out the answer to that, you need to get yourself a copy of Lost Signals and read the last story, The Ellsberg Variations. Thank you all for joining me here today. I hope you're having a fabulous virtual DragonCon. Stay safe and well till we see each other again in person. Have a great weekend.